Good morning. It's great to be here with you. A few months ago, I met with Dave Griswold in New York City, just a few weeks after I decided to leave Green Mountain Coffee Roasters after working with the company almost 27 years. And Dave and I, as we met the first morning drinking a lot of coffee, and I mean a lot of coffee, we reflected back on the past and where our paths originally crossed, and we narrowed down very quickly to a community in Veracruz called Huatusco. Huatusco represented many firsts for both of our organizations. It was the first time that Green Mountain Coffee Roasters had sent a buyer to Origin to actually buy coffee. And in this photo, you can see Deb Crowther, who was Green Mountain Coffee Roasters' buyer at the time. I had traveled with Deb to Huatusco. Deb was in search of a coffee to use in our flavor base. And after 2 days of serious cupping, Deb found what she wanted, and she was very happy. And as I look back on this picture, I honestly can't remember whether Deb was happy because she had found this coffee she'd been looking for, or whether she was happy because of the tequila that was being passed around by a farmer to celebrate this event. But nevertheless, it was also one of the very first container loads of coffee that Green Mountain Coffee Roasters had purchased from Sustainable Harvest. A container count that now exceeds 3,000 containers. For Sustainable Harvest, it was actually the very first, it was the genesis, if you will, of the relationship model that brings all of us here together for the next few days. It was the first time that Sustainable Harvest had introduced buyers to farmers. It was also the first time that Dave and I ran into a phenomenon that would become very central to our work together, and that was hunger in the coffee lands. We were downtown Huatusco one afternoon, and we ran into a farmer who approached us and said that his family had a much lower crop yield than expected, prices were lower than expected, and his family was hungry. Was there anything we could do to help him? And we ended up purchasing some food for him, but at the time thinking this was just a one-off situation. It was also the first time that we had the opportunity to meet Professor Sadas, the 95-year-old patriarch of the Huatusco Co-op, who is known and loved within the co-op and known throughout southern Mexico as a spokesperson for small-scale coffee farmers. Deb asked Professor Sadas when we met him, "To what do you owe your long life?" And Professor Sadas looked very, very seriously at Deb and said, "It's really three things. It's cigarettes, tequila, and women." This is a true story. At any rate, Huatusco was a very important force in our work together. Shortly after we finished talking about Huatusco for about an hour, we decided that we would walk uptown from our hotel in New York City up to Central Park. And on our way, we came across a coffee shop, a cafe that happened to be closed at the time. But I immediately recognized all along the windows of this shop where it was one poster, one sign, one poster after another of Green Mountain Coffee Roasters merchandising materials. And these materials had to have been 8 to 10 years old. And the last sign, which I'll blow up here a little bit that you can see, it talked very specifically about Green Mountain Coffee Roasters working closely with the Huatusco Co-op after being introduced through Sustainable Harvest in the relationship model. Just what Dave and I had just finished talking about an hour before. So here we were in New York City for the first time together in 10 years, having just spent an hour talking about the Huatusco Co-op, a city of 8.5 million people, and probably the only coffee shop in town that had 10-year-old merchandising material in the window, and here's this sign about Huatusco. Well, was this just a coincidence, or we wondered, is it some sort of a sign of some kind? Well, we continued our walk up to Central Park, and on the way, Dave asked me about my career, what I had done, what I'd learned, and where I was going. And he, after we finished this conversation, Dave asked me if I'd be willing to share this story with you. So here I am, here you are, and here we go. And before I start, I'd like to thank Dave for this opportunity to share this with you. My first day at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters was October 19th, 1987, and for those of you in the audience old enough to remember this date, that was the day that the New York Stock Exchange took its largest single drop in history. Great day to start a new job. But Actually, it was a great day. When I opened that door for the very first morning, I had no idea of the opportunities that I was going to have in front of me years later. Opportunities to engage in the industry and to meet many of you here. And I look back on this and I'm sincerely grateful for all of those opportunities that the company provided me with. My role at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters was to help this small company of 50 employees start a mail order business. This was before the internet came along. And for the first year, I was entirely focused on just the business aspect of this new venture. But a year later, a gentleman by the name of Bill Fishbein arrived. And Bill came to Green Mountain Coffee Roasters to talk about a new organization that he had founded called Coffee Kids. And perhaps many of you have heard of this organization. Bill explained what the organization was going to do, and he came to Green Mountain seeking support that the company did provide. But in the process, he handed us all a brochure. And I remember opening that brochure and seeing photos of coffee farming families living in very, very, very difficult conditions. And this experience put a face on coffee for me for the very first time, a face that I've never forgotten. A few years later, I had the opportunity to join 11 other Green Mountain Coffee Roasters employees on the company's first trip to Origin. We all went to the beautiful La Manita Estate high above the Tarrazú River in Costa Rica, and then spent 4 or 5 days traveling around this amazing country. And as we did so, I realized that I hadn't seen any vestiges at all of the poverty that was so clearly depicted in the Coffee Kids brochure. So in 1995, I was asked if I would take on the role of Director of Public Relations for Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, which I was happy to do. But as I came into this role, I knew that I was going to be the very first line of defense for the company. I would be the one that was going to answer the phone from the media. So I wanted to be as grounded as possible in our core product, which was coffee at the time. And so I had this opportunity to travel in 1995 with a small group of coffee professionals through Guatemala and Chiapas, Mexico. And on this trip, I had the opportunity to engage with small-scale farmers who were growing organic coffee. I learned a lot about organic coffee production techniques, the importance of shade-grown coffee, the importance of the cooperative structure. I came back to Vermont, where Green Mountain is based, and I was totally pumped up. I was very excited about what I'd learned, and I knew I wanted to go back to this part of the world. And I'm sure, like many of you who have had life-changing experiences, this was my first life-changing experience. So for the next 4 years, I went to language school in Chiapas and Oaxaca, Mexico. I used my month's vacation. I did immersion courses for 4 years and became dangerously fluent. And you can ask Jorge Cuevas about how dangerous it is. But at any rate, from there, I had the opportunity to use my language skills to interview small-scale farmers in Nicaragua as I assumed a new role for the company in 2006. Which was directing our supply chain community outreach team. And over the course of the next few years, I developed probably the best team at Keurig Green Mountain. And with this team, through these interviews, we learned about the thin months that Pierre talked about in his presentation. And again, this was a moving moment for me when I learned about this. As an industry, when I think back at my time in the industry, there is a mantra that I've heard so many times, and we still hear it echoed oftentimes in the halls of the industry, that if coffee farmers will only grow high-quality coffee, they'll get a better price, and they'll have a better quality of life. And it's extremely logical. And there have been many logical programs that have been put in place to support this mantra, to help farmers grow more high-quality coffee, to get a better price, to have a better quality of life. And yet, in my travels, which often take me 3 to 4 hours off of a paved road, to communities that have participated in many of these programs, in communities where Green Mountain Coffee Roasters or Keurig Green Mountain and other companies have purchased coffee for decades, I visit farmers who are living in very humble homes, who are often cooking over an unventilated fire, who have limited access to food for months of the year, who have limited access, if any, to clean water, to medical care, to educational opportunities, and the list goes on. And I have to ask myself, when I think back on that mantra, where's the beef? Where's the beef? Well, this past summer, I traveled with Pierre and some of the heifer team, And we learned through some of the discussions that Pierre mentioned that many of the farmers and their young farmers are migrating due to the conditions that I just mentioned. And then when you layer the impact of La Roya on top of it, they're leaving. And it forces us as an industry, I think, to begin to ask, who's going to grow the next generation of specialty coffee? In 2008, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters funded its first so-called food security project. It was really a project focused on income diversification, as well as helping farmers to continue to grow high-quality coffee. The farmers at Seco Café that participated were 250 families. And there was no way that I could get to know all 250 families. However, I did pick out a few families that I made an effort to visit every single year, at least once a year. And one of those families was Juana Valle and her husband, Cesar. Cesar had lost his left arm during the Contra War. And when I first visited them, they lived in a very tiny home in El Coyular, Nicaragua, at the end of a dirt road. They had about four acres of coffee. 1 acre of that was in full sun, the rest was in shade. They had no other food products growing other than a few fruit trees. So over subsequent years, as Juana and Cesar participated in this program, Juana developed a marmalade business, first by using fruits from trees that were already existing on the property to sell into the local market. And then subsequently, they began to plant fruit trees randomly, but primarily fruit trees that were interplanted amongst the sun coffee. And then just a couple of years later, we're towering over this coffee. And Juana, of course, was harvesting the fruit from those trees and continuing to develop her marmalade business. Along the way, they planted achiote, another product that they could sell in the local market that's used to dye clothing. And as we went along, every year the coffee began to look a little bit better. They had a little bit of some resources to put into their coffee production. Well, finally, in 2012, I asked Juana, what's been the most significant change on your farm over the past year? And Juana took me by the hand, led me through their coffee parcel to a field on a gentle hillside that previously had been fallow. And this is what I saw. It was passion fruit. It was about 1.5 acres of passion fruit. So I asked Juana, what does this project mean to you? And she said, well, Cesar and I earn between $3,000 and $4,000 a year to feed ourselves and our 4 children. And we harvest coffee 3 months of the year. The passion fruit, we harvest every single month. And she said, I'm not happy with the prices that we're receiving right now, but right now we're earning between $700 and $800 a month from our passion fruit. I did the quick math and realized that this is more than twice their earnings from coffee. So I said, well, what does that mean to you and your family? And she said, well, the first thing it means is that we've now hired 3 people from our remote local community to help us with this passion fruit. So they were generating employment. Secondly, she said, we've now closed the window on those 3 to 4 months of food insecurity that our family was struggling with. Well, this, of course, made me feel good. And this past March, I returned to visit Juana and Cesar, and you can see here how the passion fruit has filled in. So the yield is even more abundant now, and they're doing even better. And finally, Cesar pulled me aside, and he said, Rick, he said, I want to thank you, I want to thank Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, and I want to thank Seco Café for all of the support you've provided, but the reality is we don't need your support anymore. We've graduated, and they had graduated. They were now at a point where they were taking their earnings from their passion fruit, putting it into their coffee, and the difference in their coffee and the quality of their coffee and the yields of their coffee, it was night and day compared to when I first visited their farm 4 years earlier. It was transformative. On the same trip in March, I visited a community that's part of Protocoop, a community-based co-op in San Jeronimo, Nicaragua. And this co-op also participated in a so-called food security project with Green Mountain Coffee Roasters that was modeled, frankly, after the project very similar to the project at Seco Café. There was also a water project that Green Mountain Coffee Roasters put in place in this community the goal was to deliver water to every single household, where previously families had to hike up a hillside 25 minutes with 2 5-gallon buckets and then hike back down twice a day. So that was going to save the community a lot of time. Well, in March, I met with the water committee, which is who you see pictured here, who were members of the co-op, and I asked them about the project, and we talked a little bit about it, and then finally I asked them about La Roya. I said, has the community been affected by La Roya? And this farmer told me, he said, yes. He said, 2 years ago, our co-op harvested 2,000 quintales of coffee. Last year, we harvested 1,000, and this year, we harvested 300. It was a drop of 85%. I was shocked. I hadn't heard of this level of loss in my travels. And so I asked him, have you lost members to migration? And he said, no. And I said, well, how are people surviving? So he led me across the co-op building. He said, come with me. And we walked across the co-op building. And here were 8 silos that the community members had filled with basic grains, corn and beans, that they were going to draw off of during the thin months. He said that they were also going to sell any excess into the market as another source of income. And then he said, let's go for a walk downtown. Well, downtown was a single dirt road with about 35 houses hugging it. But in front of every single home, there was a 4-foot-high green pillar of cement with a spigot on top. And with this spigot, from the spigot, of course, was clean water that was now being delivered to every home in the community. But the farmers were using this for more than just drinking. They were using it to water and irrigate their family food gardens. And these gardens weren't just any gardens. I'm a vegetable gardener, and I was extremely jealous of what I saw. These were lush, productive gardens. So as we continue to look at these gardens, I was thinking back to when I first visited this community, just 4 years earlier, where they were struggling with these thin months. They had no access to clean water, and here they were, now having food that they could live on all year long with clean water, and yet they're surviving an 85% drop in their coffee yield. Talk about resiliency in face of climate change and other issues. This to me was very, very impressive. So Dave asked me what I'd learned over my past career at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, and over the past 8 years with a wonderful team at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. The company had invested over $40 million in supply chain community projects. And I think that the things that I've learned, I think that are very simple. First of all, I think that there are very clear pathways to development. There's a short-term approach that invests primarily in things like a drying patio, things like a classroom, things like a medical clinic, things like inputs. These are all important. But then there's another approach. And the second approach invests in people, invests in capacity building. It gives farmers the opportunity to improve their own quality of life. I think as I look back on my time in the industry, and I include myself in this, as I talk about the industry, I think we've suffered at times from short-termitis. I think we've expected long-term impact from short-term investments. And I think at times that while some of those projects have benefits in the long run, they're just not that sustainable. Oftentimes we find ourselves returning back to the same communities to invest again and again, and oftentimes in the same way, and expecting different results. In my small state of Vermont, we have a saying that if you have time to do it twice, you have time to do it right. And so when I think back on Juana and Cesar and the community of San Geronimo, I think what they demonstrate is that it is possible to produce more, to reinvest in their own farms, and to have a more sustainable livelihood. And then I think about ourselves as an industry overall, and I know there was talk this morning about government interventions, which I think also certainly is important. But as we think about ourselves in the industry, I think there are opportunities to work together through collaborative efforts like World Coffee Research, through the Coffee Lands Food Security Coalition, and organizations like this that I think are demonstrating a respect for the long-term interests of farmers. And as we invest in that way, thinking about the long-term interests of farmers, there's no doubt in my mind that the benefits of these programs are eventually going to trickle up to every link in the supply chain, including our own businesses. So where am I going? Now that I've left Keurig Green Mountain after 27 years, where am I headed? Or what am I going to do? Well, I don't know. No, I do know. I'm going to continue to advocate for farming families in forums like this. I'm going to also spend time on boards that are working to help small-scale farmers, including Food for Farmers, Root Capital, Pueblo a Pueblo, and Coffee Kids. I'm also going to be spending time working in coffee and cocoa with Lutheran World Relief and as an ambassador for Let's Talk Coffee, which I'm very, very proud to be part of this Sustainable Harvest family. I'm also going back to where Dave and I first started. I'm going back to looking at building long-term relationships, long-term durable and transparent relationships, and sustainable business models. So thank you very much.